Well, wonderful. And it seemed logical to me that we should start back at the beginning and whatever possessed you all to get started on this project, accessibility, all those years ago. What was it that made this an issue that got your attention?
Let me start, Jill, by saying what it wasn't. It wasn't Moses coming down a mountain with the tablets, that somehow there was some divine message to us. And it wasn't a committee meeting. I don't think we ever gathered and said, let's do this. So with that as a background, let me try and fill in, and we'll open the way for Tom and Sue too. I was a Methodist pastor. My first church was a typical Methodist church. You went in the basement, and that's where you had your dinners. That's where you took the tables from underneath wherever they were and the chairs and put them up. And the second floor was the sanctuary, where you went and worship. So space and talking about building use was very central to the community itself, not outside. In fact, for nursery, we didn't have a nursery room, so we built a big sandbox. It was a play box in a corner that was a niche. So the little kids, if you did have kids come in, could get in the box, and that was their terrain. So after 5 years of that, I sort of looked and I said, when I was offered United Church, when I went up and I looked at the building, all I saw was all the potential of what a building that size could do in its community. Smaller churches, very hard to invite other people from outside in, other than to come for a rummage sale or do a dinner. When I looked at it, it seemed to me that this was a church in a city neighborhood that was just waiting to be used. The prior pastor, and it was a tough time because at that time suburban churches were growing and city churches were looked upon as being not the mother church in Jerusalem that we've got to take care of, but gee, they really are sort of a burden. And Leonard, the previous pastor that I followed, made an assessment that the building, the congregation that existed, would not be able to sustain ministry in that building. So, and I'll cut to the chase. I came and I met with Leonard in his office. And I remember walking in and I looked and I said, my God, this can't be my office. I don't have enough books to put on the shelf because it was the library.
Oh.
And so the first decision I made, sort of unilaterally, was how best to function in that building. And it was turn that library, church office into a common use room that could be used for special occasion. I looked at the gym and said, hey, gyms can be played in, kids are kids, and some adult men that might want to go out and shoot a basket could do it. The rest of the building I looked at as being sort of abandoned to us, and we ought to take advantage of it, not a millstone that we ought to try and escape. So I think the initial reaction I had was this church could be a vital church in that community, and it could use its building as an opportunity to open it up. So it was strictly based on young pastors wanting to have a vision and wanting to say, yeah, I'm glad to come here. At that point, I'll leave it at that, because then it was a matter of, do you form a committee? How do you even do it? How do you get people from main floor walking in up to Overdeer Hall? Figuring that there was a memorial fund, people looked at it, people were having trouble getting up the steps. It limited what we could do upstairs. And that's when I might have mentioned it to one of the people I was playing basketball with, Tom Davies, because he had heists down in the gym. We might have been in a tavern at the time. We ought to edit that, but afterwards we walked down, and that was a way you also learned to socialize in Chicago. I don't think I ever had a counseling session at a church, but I did a lot in corner taverns and places where church people sometimes congregated. So at that point, I think Tom said, I know an architect. And Tom, I'll let you pick up from there. Sue will come in, but we've talked, and Sue will give you, I think, not how this began, because it was probably 3 people that were sitting talking and seeing if it was possible.
Okay. So, Tom Hickey, do you want to jump in at this point? How did you get roped into all this?
Well, I'll tell you, we were living in Rogers Park at the time. We had an apartment, rented an apartment there, and I was working in a fairly large firm down in the city of Chicago. Tom Davies, a friend, we met through other people in the area. And he did ask that, would I help somehow getting this project off the ground? Now, I must say that my part was the least of what had to be done. Tom Davies, Tom Gray, I can imagine what they had to go through to get this sold and the money raised. I mean, that was the hard part, I think. The drawings were the easy part. And so I said, yeah, sure, I'll do it. I'll help you with this, and did the drawings. We got a contractor. I'm not sure if it came through Tom Gray, or I'm not sure how we found it. But anyway, the contractor that ended up doing it, I did a lot of work with him after this. So it kind of steamrolled after this project. This was a little thing, and it grew and grew. We did some bigger projects. And he did a lot of church work. This Joe Crofel, he was the contractor at the time. And so I said, sure. I always felt that, I was very lucky and blessed to be where I was in my life. I had no big problems. So I said, I would gladly give back to anything I can here. And I'll do it today. I think I do it. I'd rather do it more now even than I did then. But because I get involved with a lot of things in the city and up here in Michigan now with Habitat for Humanity. But anyway, getting this going was really not my, it wasn't involved in all the fundraising and things like that. So I think I got through it pretty easily.
Okay. Sue, do you want to add, how did you and Tom, were you there in the tavern, or was it just?
No, I didn't get it included on those tavern outings. And I think that, looking at the big picture, which we were not looking at the big picture. I think we were looking at more accessibility for the people in our own church. Tom Gray had mentioned that people who were in wheelchairs literally didn't come to church. So, Tom, I don't even remember seeing a person in a wheelchair at church. And I think they just, Tom Gray used to bring communion to them. And so it was not a matter of us even using the word accessibility or, disability rights or any of that at least in my head, we were just thinking about how are we going to make this huge albatross of a building usable. And they did figure out through Tom Hickey where they could put it and how they could, run it on the inside and have it go up to the third floor. And then that really did open up possibilities. And we moved to California from Chicago in 1979. So the church was beginning certainly then to reach out further into the community. I think probably by 1977, they had started looking at different groups that might be interested in using the space. And then just by accident, Tom and I went back 25 years later to the church, and it happened to be the Sunday of the 25th anniversary of the soup kitchen, which in the meantime, they had developed and was on the third floor there, where we used to have church suppers. And also then I saw Hmong women using the sewing rooms. They had set up sewing rooms. And so all of a sudden, and I think it was Tom Gray and the minister after him. What was his name, Tom? John Hour. That really started to reach out. So that's what I thought was so inspiring about now is here we are almost 50 years later. And the church is really even more involved in the community. And I was really so, it was just joyful to see all the groups that use the church now. You're a food distribution center, and you have, I think, before school and after school programs or daycare. And I saw a transformation legal center. And I think I'm pretty sure we had AA there, Tom Gray. And now they have that plus NA and all kinds of groups. So I think as Rogers Park has changed, the church has really kept to its mission of being inclusive for the community that's there.
Well, that's certainly true. But now, Tom Hickey, you mentioned that there was quite an effort involved besides doing the drawings, although I don't want you to belittle that. My late husband was an architect, so I know that's no small feat, those drawings. But how about the second question I posed to you had to do with well, what did it take? I mean, the idea, the notion that, hey, that we've got this great resource, this huge building that has all kinds of potential for serving the needs in the neighborhood and the larger community. But what's it going to take to really make it useful to everybody and accessible and inclusive for everybody? How can we make it happen? Now, I know in the write-up that you did, Sue, that there was apparently some sort of memorial fund had been established that maybe someday there would be an elevator somewhere in this building. So I don't know if there were enough funds already collected in that you had a really good start on the financing for the project, or whether you needed to raise additional funds.
I don't know, Tom, whether people had to contribute to more than the memorial fund. I don't think so. I don't remember any big church fundraising around it.
No, it was not a hard sell. Once it started, the pieces just started to fall into place in terms of people looking and making commitments and saying that we're going to continue our budget. It was a tangible project to say we're alive and well, and we're going to be on 1545 West Morris and in ministry to the community that we're in. So it was an affirming project that drew the church together, and it certainly was something which the Spirit moved, because it wasn't something we were smart enough or strong enough to sort of claim and say this is what we should be doing.
Well, that is inspiring. Thank you.
Well, it's sort of like you all have done. I don't want to skip off, but really, I don't know what the meetings were for the Uplift, but when I saw that you were going to look for $300,000 at this time when churches are closing, I've been a pastor of 4 churches and only 2 are still open. So you know and the fact that you all have affirmed the ministry to the community through the building seems to me to be somewhat what we did by just saying we're not going to die, we're going to minister.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that when I saw the video that you all did, I thought, yes, if we would have interviewed people and the technology would have been there, we would have been telling the same story about our elevator and what it was doing. When I was minister, people would come in and request use of the building. And rather than talk about rentals, it was always, well, building use is a loose term to say, what do you need the building for? And I shared with Sue that we made the Chicago Sun-Times on October 9th, 1975. Let me just read a couple of lines. Chicago at night is a city of small clusters. People meet in little groups on 100,000 pretexts. Some plot, some drink wine out of bottles covered with paper sacks. Some watch television, some approve the minutes of the last meeting. Some hang around, some try to find new ways to survive. On the second floor of a church in Rogers Park, a small cluster of people has formed. The group calls itself Shy Friends Anonymous. I had someone come in the office early on, and I was building use and said, I'd like to start a group for shy people. And my immediate thought was, how does anyone start a group for people who are shy? How do you get them to come? We try and get them to come to church because we're going to. But my instinct is never to say no to someone's hopes or dreams or requests. That just didn't seem to me to fit. That churches ought to be where you listen. So we started, and it was never, well, I'll charge you so much. It was, well, start it, and if it works, then we'll meet and we'll talk, and we'll try and find a date that isn't conflicting. We'll talk about how you can help us, provide this. And my hope is that the accessibility that you keep alive is always generated on being kind to people's hopes and dreams, especially in the city, because you all are hopes and dreams that are realizing, and that's the gift that we give beyond the building, is our openness to the people that come. It's interesting to me at this point is the insight that at my age now, if you came and engaged me and here's a vision, we need you, we'd really like to keep this church going for the next generation. that we had our kids baptized here. We had some marriages. We buried some people out of the church. Do you think I would not jump on that immediately and say, hey, let's make this happen?
Wow.
I can't remember having a meeting, an administrative meeting, where we said, hey, we've got plans. We could do this by running this thing up from the inside. We could get a contractor. People were affirming that the church lives beyond them.
Hmm.
And they were older people. And at that point, the only question came, and the hook was that the thrift shop, it would mean needing to close it down. So with Marjorie and the thrift shop, she looked at it, and we looked and saw, and I don't know, Tom, this may be where you come back in, that there were 3 storefronts, but there weren't load-bearing walls. So the negotiation with Marjorie was, Marjorie got to close a little bit, but we can expand this thing and make it bigger. So Tom, did you discover that? I never would have thought of it, knocking down walls, but.
Well, I think it was a matter of identifying the project problems, what levels we wanted to get to, and then figuring out what the framing was that we had to deal with to get from level to level. And I don't remember all the things we went through. That it's a little foggy now.
But the logistics of that were that you were able to design, and we were able to come in with solutions. Once you get a project going, you want the momentum of it to carry. And it seemed to me that the congregation was affirming it. And even when you went down into the sand, remember we had trouble with the hydraulic.
Yeah, it was a hydraulic elevator, so you had to put a piston in that went down as high as you were going to go up. So, and doing it inside of a building is always hard, because it's restricted.
So I really think God is unfolding over the years, and the fact that you're at a point now where that can be reaffirmed was just inspiring to me. And I think you're going to experience what we're experienced back so many years ago.
Well, I thank you for all those good words, because we've been working on it now for over a year. I hope it's been a journey, but I've been wondering as well whether that experience all those years ago got you 3 involved in doing these kinds of accessibility issues in other organizations and other churches that you've been involved with over the years.
I don't know, Tom Hickey, did you go on to do any other accessibility projects?
Oh, yes. very, very many. I did a lot of affordable housing and elderly housing in the city. Actually, I think at the time that we were doing the ramp in Rogers Park, I was working on an elderly project in Norfolk, Virginia, John Knox home, which was about a 12-story apartment. And I've done a number of other small theaters like Victory Gardens. They needed an elevator. I said, sure, I can help you. I know how to do it. I've done it before. Little theaters. See, my favorites are churches, affordable housing, and theaters. I will do anything for these people. And it's because they're just wonderful to work with. It's just, they're so appreciative versus doing on a warehouse or something like that. It's just, it's not the same. But no, I did a lot of federally funded HUD projects where you had to comply with lots of rules about parking, bathroom accessibility, and every throughout the whole units, whole projects. But maybe this was the beginning. I don't know. It's hard to say. It was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Let's just say, Tom, that if we make the story that it was the beginning, because
I'll agree.
You were a key piece. Tom and I were along for the ride in terms of having someone say, you could take these plans in and show them to a board of trustees, and they would have a tangible way of saying, hey, let's do this.
The other question I had is, what was it or is it? I mean, that connects you still to United Church of Riders Park in terms of, when you did hear about our Uplift Accessibility Project, 50 years later, after your own accessibility improvements, so that would say, I mean, other than, oh yeah, I remember we did that way back when.
I remember our times in Rogers Park as being very, very special and very unique, that I've carried with me my whole life. And I did keep up with Tom Gray and Tom Hickey with Christmas cards. And so I only heard about the project through Tom Gray. And then he said, do you know how to get a hold of Tom Hickey? And I said, oh, yes, I know. I didn't realize you had moved to Michigan, but, I was able to track you down. And so that's how I know about the expanded project and the plans now.
When I saw that you all had affirmed what the ministry was, that Sue, Tom Hickey, Tom Davies, his kids, my family, Jim Hovland, Marjorie Keenly Sy, bless all the saints that made it happen, that we needed to join with you to make it happen and make this succeed. And the fact that you were halfway there seemed to me to be, you had done the hard work of saying we're going to do it, and you're halfway there. Uplift, we want to be a small part of that lift at this point. And trust the fact that if you're halfway there, you don't look back, you look forward, and it's attainable, and you can do it with a little help from your friends.